Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. For episode 90, we are in 2 Samuel 13 and 14. It's a lot, so let's just dive straight in as we learn about Amnon, Tamar, and Absalom. Chapter 13, verse 1. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. Now, Amnon and Tamar would be half-brother and sister, right? Same father, different mothers. Verse 2, and Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. So that is a problem right there. You already kind of get a sense of Amnon's heart. He is trying to find a way to have a sexual relationship with his sister, but he's worried because he might get found out because she's a virgin. Yes, this is completely messed up if you're wondering. Verse 3, but Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. This is the brother of David that we haven't really heard mentioned yet, okay? So this is David's nephew. You might remember that Joab and Abishai and the other one escapes me right now, that they are also nephews of David. Or actually, we might not have gotten to that yet. That might be in a later one that I remember outlining but not teaching you. Anyway, so this is verse 3. This is David's nephew who is speaking to Amnon here. Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, and Jonadab was a very crafty man. And that's not a good thing in this text. Verse 4, and he said to him, son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me? And Amnon said to him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Jonadab said to him, well, lie down in your bed, pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat and prepare food in my sight that I might see it and eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes of bread in my sight, that I might eat from her hand. And David sent home to Tamar, saying, go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went down to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down. She took dough and kneaded it, and made cakes in sight and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat, right? Because that's not his intention anyway. Amnon said, send everyone out for me. So everyone went out from him. And Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber that I might eat from your hand. And Tamar took the cakes that she had made and brought them into the chamber to his bedchamber, to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near to him to eat, he took hold of her and said, come and lie with me, my sister. Come and have sex with me. She said, no, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where would I be able to carry my shame? As for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in all of Israel. Now, therefore, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. So she says, look, don't violate me like this. Ask the king, and he'll give me to you as a wife, and then it can be official. That's not what Amnon cares about. Amnon is only concerned with his own base desires. Verse 14, but he would not listen to her, and he, being stronger than her, violated her and lay with her. So he raped her, raped his half-sister. Amnon hated her. This is interesting. Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up and go. And she says, no, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me. But again, he would not listen to her. And he called the young man who served him and said, put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door behind her. Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves. This is the other place that this occurs. This is from, you might remember Genesis chapter 37, where we talked about Joseph and his multicolored robe. It's probably not multicolored. It's a robe with long sleeves. Same exact words here. So she has a multicolored robe or a robe with long sleeves, something to identify her as one of the virgins in Israel, right? So thus were all the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servants put her out and bolted the door after her. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the robe that she wore, and she laid her hand on her head, and she went away, crying aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take it to heart. Which is not a very sympathetic brotherly response either. But it says this, Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. Now, Absalom, at this moment, he says, look, don't make a big deal about it, because Absalom, so Amnon had made this plan that he wanted to rape his sister. Absalom has already in his heart conceived a plan to kill his brother. And so there's this wickedness in these sons of David. Look at verse 21. When David heard of all these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good or bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. After 2 full years, so 2 years after this atrocious sin, Absalom had sheep shearers at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, let us not go, lest we be a burden to you." But he pressed him, but he would not go, but he gave him his blessing. Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. So Absalom says, "Hey, look, I'm going to have a feast. We're shearing the sheep. We're going to have a big feast. Why don't you and all my brothers and half brothers come and to this feast with me?" And David goes, "No, we'd be a burden to you." But Absalom eventually gets all the brothers to come. So verse 28 says, then Absalom commanded his servants, "Mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then you shall kill him. Do not fear, have I not commanded you? Be courageous and valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded, and all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. While they were on the way, the news came to David, "Absalom has killed all the king's sons, not one of them is left." So it's gossip, right? And it's false gossip because Absalom has not killed all the sons. He's killed one. And so, verse 31, the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all of his servants who were standing by tore their garments. But Jonadab, remember, this is the guy who gave Amnon the idea to rape his sister. But Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead." But Absalom fled, and the young men who kept watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him on the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, "Behold, the king's sons have come. As your servant has said, so it has come about." This guy Jonadab, man, he is not good, dude. He's hanging around. He's always kind of like whispering in people's ear. He is not a good guy. Verse 36, as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came, lifted up their voice and wept, and the king also and his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there for 3 years. All right, so Absalom waits for 2 years to kill his brother, and then he's hiding out from his dad for 3 years. It goes on to say in verse 39 that the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. So David is longing for his son Absalom's return, which is kind of strange, right? Isn't this just a little bit strange that David was mourning for Amnon, and now he's mourning for Absalom, but now he's comforted about Amnon's death, and so he's like, all right, I'm ready for Absalom to come back home. Look at 14:1. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, remember him, he's the kind of commander of David's army, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said, "Pretend to be a mourner, put on mourning garments, don't anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning for many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak this to him." So Joab put all the words in her mouth. When the woman of Tekoa came to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and paid homage to the king and said, "Save me, O king." And the king, that's David, said to her, "What's your trouble?" She said, "I am just a widow. My husband is dead. And your servant had 2 sons, and they quarreled with one another in the field. And there was no one to separate them. And one son struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen against your servant. And they say, 'Give up the man who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed.' And they would destroy the heir also. Thus they would quench my coal that is left and leave my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth." So Joab makes up this story for this woman to tell David. And she says, "Look, my husband's dead. I have 2 sons left. They were in the field one day fighting. One killed the other. And now the townspeople are wanting to put the murderer to death. And if that happens, then my heir is gone and all of this is over. I don't have anyone to carry on my family's name." What she's doing, because this is all a made-up story, what she's doing is trying to make David think about his 2 boys, Amnon and Absalom killed Amnon, and now Absalom has fled for his life, and she's trying to get him to kind of sympathize, right? Verse 8, then the king said to the woman, "Go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you." And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, On me be the guilt, my lord, and on my father's house let the king and his throne be guiltless. And the king says, if anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall never touch you again. Then she said, please let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood kill no more, and my son not be destroyed. And he said, as the Lord lives, not one hair on your son's head shall fall to the ground. And the woman said, please let your servant speak one more word to my lord the king. And he said, speak it. And the woman said, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, insomuch as the king does not bring back his banished one home again. So when David says, you know what, I'll make sure that your murderous son isn't put to death, she goes, look, the moment you say that, like, you convict yourself because you won't bring back your son. And so verse 14 happens to be one of my favorite verses in the Bible, but she says, we must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain outcast. So God devises means so that the banished one will not remain outcast. It's one of my favorite verses because sin has banished us from God, but God has devised means in Christ that we will not remain banished. So she says, bring your son back. This is what you need to do. And the king says to her in verse 18, do not hide anything from me. And the woman said, let my lord speak. And the king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all of this? In other words, David has caught on. He goes, did Joab put you up to this? And the woman said, as surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or to the left. From anything that the Lord the king has said, it was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all these words in the mouth of your servant. In order to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. But my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of the Lord to know all things that are on the earth. So the king said to Joab, behold, I grant you this now. Go and bring back the young man Absalom. Joab fell on his face and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord king, in that the king has granted the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. Now remember, the Amnon and Tamar thing, right? That happened 5 years ago, right? 2 years later, Amnon was murdered, and now Absalom has been gone for 3 years, right? So let's do it like this. This shouldn't be 5 years. Amnon and Tamar happened, and then 2 years later, there was the murder. We'll do it like that. And then 3 years later, Absalom gets to come home. Okay? He comes home, but his father still won't speak to him. Look at this, verse 24. Let him, this is what King David says, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the presence of the king. Now in all Israel, there was no one to be more praised for his handsome appearance than Absalom. For from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, for at the end of every year he used to cut it, when it was heavy on him, he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. There were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. So Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. So now it's been 7 years total since Amnon and Tamar. It's been 5 years since Absalom has seen his father, and 2 years since he's been back in Jerusalem. So Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. So Absalom sent a second time to Joab, but Joab would not come. So Absalom said to his servants, do you see Joab's field, how it's next to mine? He has barley there. Go and set his field on fire. So Absalom cannot get Joab's attention. He's like, hey, Joab, I want to speak to you. Joab doesn't come. Sends messengers a second time. Joab, I want to speak to you. Joab doesn't come. So Absalom tells his servants, go burn his field. And that's what's going to get his attention. Then he said, see, Joab's field is next to mine. He has barley there. Set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said, why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, because I sent word to you saying, come here that I might send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would have been better for me to be there still. Now, therefore, let me go into the presence of the king. And if there's guilt in me, let him put me to death. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom, and he came and he bowed himself to the face on the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So this is, we don't see this yet. I mean, I'll point it out to you tomorrow, but all of this sets up Absalom's rebellion against his father. David never said anything to Amnon. David David's son Amnon raped his daughter Tamar, and David never said anything about it. And then Absalom kills his brother and then flees, and David doesn't do anything about that. And then 3 years later, because of Joab, Absalom is brought back, but David doesn't want to speak to him. And so 2 years after that, Absalom finally gets to stand in front of his dad's face again, and they embrace, and his dad kisses him, and you think everything's okay. But you're going to see that Absalom he's done with it, and he is ready to be king. He's ready for his dad to be out and for himself, Absalom, to be king. But we will talk about that tomorrow. We're going to cover a lot tomorrow. We're going to kind of have to go through it quickly. I won't be able to cover all the chapters, but we're covering 5 chapters tomorrow. And so we're just going to fly through it. But anyway, join us tomorrow, 2 Samuel 15 through 19, if you're reading ahead, and also Psalm 3. We'll see you then. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.